Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Jacory Croskey-Merritt, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 4 running back rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season, going over my top 36 running backs. If you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, be sure to travel down to the description of the video. We have timestamps available there. Now, before I get into talking about these running backs on an individual basis, in order to justify their rankings, a quick reminder in terms of matchups. Again, I always try to talk about matchups every single episode, whether it is on an individual player basis, but now that we have 3 weeks of data, we can identify the most advantageous matchup going into this week. As you can see, the Baltimore Ravens, Tennessee Titans, New York Giants, etc. are the most advantageous matchups at the position in terms of running back rushing statistics allowed, rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. I isolate rushing statistics because the receiving workload that a running back is able to gather over the course of the game is often determined by the quarterback checkdown rate and, of course, additionally, the game script and whether or not they are trying to fight back from a deficit. So oftentimes we try to ignore the overall usage of running backs within the receiving game in terms of matchups. Therefore, we have the Baltimore Ravens, of course, who have gave up a lot of points last night to David Montgomery and Gibbs at the top of this conversation, while on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the more difficult matchups at the position consist of the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Browns, the Rams, the Buccaneers, the Chargers, etc. I will refer back to these statistics over the course of today's episode, but I just wanted to go ahead and share them first and foremost with you guys, just so we're all on the same page. Now, before I get into talking about my top 36 running backs, and we'll begin with Christian McCaffrey in just a moment, a quick reminder for those of you who want an edge upon your league mates for the remainder of the season, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Of course, besides the daily uploads, of course, we have live streams every day. I'll be live streaming later tonight, so if you have any waiver wire questions, trade questions, be sure to swing on by starting at 6:45 p.m. PST. Again, if you guys want an even further advantage upon your league mates, besides subscribing to the channel and helping us get one step closer to 100K subscribers, you can go ahead and check out Betr. When you sign up today using code Andrew, make that first time deposit minimum of $10 and make a first time play within a real cash play. You'll be eligible to get my Sunday morning rankings every week for the remainder of the season from my email directly to yours. That's by position, by to your half PPR and full PPR. Again, and on top of that, of course, I'll be putting together plays every single episode. And additionally, for new users who sign up using code Andrew, you get a free $10 via Betr. So check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. And if you are eligible, be sure to take advantage of the opportunity on hand. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, let's get into talking about my top 36 running back rankings, beginning with our number one, Christian McCaffrey. Over the course of this season thus far, weeks 1 through 3, he has 3 of the top 19 performances in a half PPR scoring format, scoring 18.7 or more fantasy points in each of those games. There's only one other running back that is in that category, and it's James Cook. But the difference between James Cook and Christian McCaffrey is that McCaffrey hasn't scored a touchdown in 2 of the last 3 games. Therefore, he's really had to rely upon receptions. Amongst all players in the National Football League this season, he's number 2 in total receptions, only behind Puka Nacua. 25 total receptions, certainly doing him a lot of favors, but just wait for the touchdowns to start to flow in. And once, in fact, they do, and they become a weekly part of his score lines, he's going to continue to be at the top tier of this conversation as he's able to score 18 plus fantasy points without even finding the end zone. He's a very special breed, and of course, that makes him the number 1 going into this week. Number 2, we have Jonathan Taylor. Now, speaking of number 1, he's technically the number 1 running back in fantasy football after this most recent performance of 30-plus fantasy points, was able to make up all the lost touchdowns that he had from Indiana Jones in weeks 1 and 2, and of course was able to recoup it with a 3-touchdown game in week 3 against the Tennessee Titans. That 46-yard rushing touchdown was vintage Jonathan Taylor. A lot of people are saying he looks like his 2021 version. I think he looks better than the 2021 version of himself. There's a possibility in which we could see Jonathan Taylor go above and beyond that season's statistic line. Now, again, with this offense and this defense humming, there's a lot of potential for him to continue to find success, even though they're taking on the Los Angeles Rams, one of the difficult matchups when we're talking about the number 1 running back in fantasy football, behind an incredible offensive line in an offense that has only punted once thus far this season. Of course, he's an automatic start. Number 3, we have Bijan Robinson. Look, Michael Penix and the kicking game certainly did them no favors, certainly put them into a negative game script, and despite how efficient Bijan Robinson was against the Carolina Panthers run-stop defense with 13 carries for 72 yards, 5 receptions for 39 yards, 18 touches over 100 yards all-purpose. These are beautiful numbers, but wasn't able to find the end zone and wasn't able to find himself much opportunity share within the late stages of this game because Michael Penix had to throw for a majority of the time. Of course, Michael Penix turned over the ball, had himself a 50% passing completion percentage, and hopefully he'll be able to turn it around this week, as they'll certainly need Michael Penix to up his game considering they're taking on the Washington Commanders. Luckily for Bijan, the Commanders have allowed 84 rushing yards in each of the last 2 games to opposing running backs. Last time out against this defense, Bijan ran for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 17 of the 2024 matchup, in which Michael Penix, yes, in that game was starting. Number 4, we have James Cook. Look, amongst all running backs thus far this season, is leading in terms of rushing touchdowns scored with 4 total. In 2024, he tied Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs with the most rushing touchdowns amongst all running backs last season, so he's continuing his streak of success. And as of right now, the Bills are currently 16-point favorites going into the matchup against the New Orleans Saints. Therefore, we're expecting a high-scoring event for the Buffalo Bills side of this matchup, which is a positive script, which is run heavy. In the event in which that occurs, of course, James Cook should be implicated for a touchdown minimum, if not more. As of right now, the Saints allowing 12.93 fantasy points per game on the ground to opposing running backs. I think James Cook could very easily have himself just 20 fantasy points on the ground within this matchup. To close out the S tier, we have Josh Jacobs taking on the Dallas Cowboys after a very eventful Sunday in which the Green Bay Packers were not able to defeat the Cleveland Browns late in that game because, of course, that blocked field goal, but again, struggling in terms of running the ball against that Cleveland Browns front. We now have an opportunity for the Green Bay Packers to have a bounce-back performance against the Dallas Cowboys. The Josh Jacobs 10 consecutive game streak of scoring a touchdown was broken, but streaks are meant to be broken and, of course, restarted. This week, I'm expecting Josh Jacobs to find himself in the end zone and, of course, for this Green Bay Packers rushing attack to impose their will upon this Dallas Cowboys defense. And, it was nice to see that Josh Jacobs was at least able to get himself reintegrated within the receiving game. 9 targets, 5 catches, 44, primarily because of the necessity to get him involved in that capacity, considering Jordan Love was under pressure for the majority of that contest. All right, to begin the A tier, we have Saquon Barkley taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Barkley is coming off of the fewest rushing yards he has had as an Eagle thus far in his entire career. Again, coming off a performance of 46 rushing yards against the LA Rams, in which the year prior dominated against them with 200 plus each game. But now that he takes on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, even though it is technically a difficult matchup, I still expect him to continue to play well. Expect the Eagles offense to put themselves in positions to succeed. Now, back in 2024, when the Eagles took on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 4, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown both missed that game due to injury. But in that game, Saquon Barkley had 12 touches for 116 total yards. Even though, again, this is a great run-stop defense, they haven't taken on the Eagles' offensive line as of thus far this season. Saquon Barkley should be an immediate automatic start as per usual. Our number 7, we have Devon Achane. The only reason that Achane drops to number 7 in my mind is because the recent utilization and expansion of Ollie Gordon's role within this offense. Outside of that, Devon Achane has been a superb runner. 4.9 yards per carry thus far this season, continuing to find himself a lot of receiving upside. This most recent game, 7 receptions on 9 targets. As long as that continues to go in that direction, which it should, he is going to continue to be fantasy relevant. They have an opportunity of taking on the Jets, who are the 10th best matchup at the position in terms of rushing statistics isolated. So once he finds his success on the ground, of course, he'll expand upon that within his receiving upside. Last season against the Jets in week 14 and 18, put up 15.9 and 18.1 half PPR fantasy points. We should see much of the same this week. Number 8, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, who's coming off a 2-touchdown game, 5 receptions, and 99 total yards. In fact, in 13 of the last 16 games he has played, he has had 99 or more yards. In 14 of the last 16 games he has played, he has scored 1 touchdown minimum, whether it's on the ground or through the air. But this week, they have a difficult matchup. Just like Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, these guys all are going to have difficult matchups, but we still have to fire them up, despite the fact that they're taking on the Cleveland Browns, who just most recently shut down the entire offense of the Green Bay Packers, who definitely delivered quite the punishment to the Detroit Lions. On paper, this is an intriguing matchup, but I truly think that the Detroit Lions are going to blow them out. Just in the same way in which the Baltimore Ravens did it in week 2, I think this Cleveland Browns defense, if you take them seriously, you should be able to impose your will, despite the fact that, again, allowed only 6.27 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs and 2.25 yards per carry to opposing running backs. But the honest truth is they haven't taken on the Detroit Lions offensive line as of thus far this season. Number 9, we have Jordan Mason, who's coming off of a breakout performance in which, again, when you have 116 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and obviously the Cincinnati Bengals got completely shellacked in that game, this was a one-sided affair, but Jordan Mason stepped up to the task on hand. Thus far this season, averaging 5.35 yards per carry. Over the course of his entire career, has always averaged over 5 yards per carry, whether it's been now with the Minnesota Vikings or, of course, back in the days with the San Francisco 49ers. Now, he has an opportunity this week of taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Ramondre Stevenson and his efforts certainly did a favor in regards to the overall matchup numbers for the Steelers, as he did them a lot of favors, fumbling the ball a couple times there. But the Steelers are technically still the 8th best matchup, allowing 4.19 yards per carry on average and nearly 15 fantasy points per game on the ground alone. I expect a one-sided affair here in which, of course, Jordan Mason is imposing his will in a positive game script and running downhill against this lacking run-stop defense of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Number 10 to close out the A tier is Omarion Hampton. Look, this is why we wanted to buy low on him last week, and I mentioned it every single episode in which I live stream here on the channel. Because again, Omarion Hampton has too much talent, and the offense he was associated with has too much firepower. So again, once you go ahead and you put him in positions to succeed, and you finally present him with an ample opportunity share, 19 carries, which led to 70 yards and a rushing touchdown, 7 targets, 6 catches, 59, and nearly 22 fantasy points and a half PPR. Again, it is incredibly unfortunate for Najee Harris to have a season-ending injury, but now that the door opened for Omarion Hampton to find success, and then you add on top of it the season-ending injury, the door is off its hinges. Hampton is running away with the job, and he's going to be a dominant force. And now that he has an opportunity of taking on the Giants this week, the third best matchup at the position, allowing 5.2 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, 19 points per game on the ground alone, expect for Hampton to have himself another incredible performance. Number 11 is Derrick Henry, who, yes, is having some trouble holding on to the football. But again, that happens. When we're talking about a Hall of Fame player like Derrick Henry and the potential upside that he provides every single week, I understand that most recent performances have been quite underwhelming, coming off of 2 games in a row in which he has had 13 or fewer rushing attempts. Over the course of his 2024 campaign, he had 3 games in which he had 13 or fewer attempts. Every single one of those games for the Baltimore Ravens was a loss. Again, the last 2 weeks, 12 and 11 attempts, hasn't led to very many points and hasn't led to very many yards, which again is incredibly concerning, but I expect him to bounce back. We have seen, of course, this matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs favor well for Barkley and Skattebo in the last 2 games, as the Chiefs are allowing nearly 13 fantasy points per game on the ground alone and 4.2 yards per carry on average thus far this season to opposing running backs. Number 12 is Bucky Irving. Look, Bucky Irving coming off of a game in which he had 29 touches, 99 yards. I mean, again, over the course of the last 2 weeks, despite the fact that he has not scored a touchdown, he has been top 17 in both of those weeks in a half PPR scoring format. So just wait until the touchdowns start to flow in his favor. And of course, it's going to lead to him being in this top 12 conversation. Over the course of 10 of the last 11 games, he has accompanied his performances with 83 yards minimum. So again, once those touchdowns come in, he's going to be a potential 14.3 plus fantasy point contributor. And when you take on the Eagles, funny enough, thus far this season on the ground alone, allowing 14.3 fantasy points per game on average, the 9th best matchup at the position, allowing 4.7 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. Number 13, we have Trey Benson, who again is going to be taking over for the unfortunate season-ending injury of James Conner. Look, as of right now, when we talk about the opportunity share that is going to be exposed to Trey Benson, if you have an opportunity of picking him up and your league is a smaller one, maybe it's 8 to 10 leagues, and he somehow in some way is available on the waivers, do yourself the favor, utilize your fab, utilize your number 1 waiver priority, because he is going to be an impactful asset for many weeks to come. Because you got to remember, the opportunity share within this backfield thus far this season, weeks 1 through 3, running backs, 18.3 attempts per game, 7 targets per game. That's 25 opportunities per week. And as of right now, via Betr, his current number in terms of full PPR points that you are picking more or less on is at 15.5 points. The expectation right now is that he is a low-end RB1 or fringe, high-end RB2, which is why I currently have him in our number 13, as I'm expecting him to be able to deliver some punishment to the Seattle defense. Even though Seattle's defense, in terms of stopping opposing running backs, has been solid thus far this season, I expect Trey Benson, with the opportunity share that he's going to be exposed to on the ground through the air, to be a fantastic option for fantasy purposes. Number 14, we have Kyren Williams, who's coming off of a game in which luckily he was able to find himself in the end zone via the receiving touchdown. And even though Blake Corum looks great over the course of the last 2 weeks in terms of his opportunity share, this is still Kyren's backfield. Taking on the Colts this week, even though it doesn't seem like the most advantageous matchup, technically in the last 2 weeks, they've given up 70 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown minimum to opposing running backs that they have faced. Therefore, whether it has been a Tony Pollard and or a J.K. Dobbins, they've all found success, and so will Kyren Williams within the upcoming matchup. The only thing that is of concern is, of course, when they get down into the red zone, Davante Adams is the primary threat, especially inside the 10-yard line. He has himself 8 targets in the red zone, but 5 targets inside the 10-yard line, which has led to 0 touchdowns. Just hand it off to Kyren Williams and give us the fantasy points that we desire. Number 15, speaking of J.K. Dobbins just moments ago, he has an opportunity of taking on the Cincinnati Bengals and following in the footsteps of Jordan Mason, who just went for over 115 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on the ground. Now, in this most recent performance for J.K. Dobbins, it didn't look good in the first half. He had himself -4 rushing yards in the first half, but immediately on the first drive of the second half came out and completely delivered for this offense. 3 carries for 66 yards on 3 rushing attempts in a row and found the end zone immediately with a rushing touchdown. Now that they have an opportunity of taking on a top 5 matchup at the position, the Bengals allowing over 17 fantasy points per game on the ground alone, this should be a run-heavy script in the favor of the Denver Broncos, in which, of course, J.K. Dobbins should be fantasy relevant once again. The next player I wanted to mention is Jaylen Warren, our number 16. Look, Jaylen Warren, for 2 consecutive weeks, 18 plus touches, and additionally has scored over 10 fantasy points in a half PPR every single week this season. Rodgers, of course, continues to look in his direction as the check-down king of quarterbacks, and of course, it's continuing to raise the baseline production of Jaylen Warren, coming off of a game in which he had 18 carries, but also 6 targets and 5 receptions. Despite the fact that, of course, Kenneth Gainwell steals a touchdown, that's going to happen, but ultimately, when you take on the Vikings, you're certainly going to have to get the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands quickly. And Jaylen Warren will certainly be able to contribute not only on the ground, but through the air in a matchup in which should be a negative game script, and of course, Jaylen Warren will be implicated for even more receiving upside. Number 17 is Ashton Jeanty. Look, we can all agree that the Raiders' offensive line is below average, and I think that is a nice way of saying it. As of thus far this season, they have done no favors for Ashton Jeanty. Majority of his rushing attempts are leading to offensive linemen completely missing blocks or losing their one-on-one matchups against defenders. Nonetheless, the Bears, as of right now, are allowing 5.34 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs thus far this season. This could be the game in which Ashton Jeanty could break out, and if in fact he's able to accomplish that, it would be a perfect time right now to buy low on him, considering the 3 most disappointing performances of averaging about 7 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. This is the perfect time to potentially get in on the ground floor at a very low investment point in comparison to where we were drafting Ashton Jeanty at this offseason. Number 18 is Tony Pollard, who's taking on the Houston Texans. Look, this is the final week without Tyjae Spears. Expect for a lot of opportunity in the direction of Tony Pollard. Earlier this morning, we did hear that the head coach, Brian Callahan, the primary play caller, is going to be relinquishing his play calling duties to their offensive coordinator. We'll see how this goes, but they're certainly going to still run the ball a bunch, especially considering they're taking on the Texans, who are the 4th best matchup at the position, allowing 17.37 fantasy points per game on the ground alone. I would expect Tony Pollard to even potentially be better than the number 18 rank, considering the matchup. It should be a low-scoring event as the Texans offense cannot move the ball, much less score. Last season against this defense, Tony Pollard was averaging 13.3 fantasy points per game. We're hoping for much of the same. Number 19, we have Cam Skattebo, a literal living battering ram. The kind of hits that he was delivering to defenders, he was literally running full speed, head down, like a legitimate battering ram into the chest of defenders. I mean, obviously we saw it in his days at Arizona State, but my goodness, in the big leagues, this is just a completely different type of running back. Ultimately, when you're able to accomplish as much as he was able to on the ground, 6 yards per carry on average and a touchdown, 8 targets, 6 catches, 61. Now you get the quarterback change to Jackson Dart, which should give life to this offense even furthermore. I mean, the stat that I saw the other day, which I didn't hear a single time this entire offseason, but I was just most recently exposed to it, was the fact that back in 2011, Brian Daboll, the current head coach and play caller of this offense for the New York Giants, he was the former offensive coordinator of the Browns in 2011. Their primary running back was Peyton Hillis. That's what Skattebo is for this offense. And now that Tyrone Tracy is down, not only has the door opened up, but very similar to a Omarion Hampton, the door's off his hinges as Cam Skattebo is running right through it like he's the Kool-Aid man. All right, moving on to our number 20. We have Travis Etienne, who again continues to play well despite the Trevor Lawrence antics, and despite the fact that the offensive coordinator, play caller, Liam Cohen, insists on continuing to give the ball to Tootin within the red zone. And despite how much Tootin and Allen continue to play within this offense, Travis Etienne still exposed to a very solid volume of opportunity, 16 rushing attempts this most recent week. But in terms of his fantasy point per game contributions, they're beginning to diminish every single week as we see other running backs get into the mix. I will say that this offensive line is still playing well. On the rushing touchdown that he had in this most recent game in week 3, again, not a single one of his offensive linemen missed the block. They got onto the defenders, they moved bodies, and it opened up opportunities for Travis Etienne. I'm hoping that's going to continue to be the same, especially when you're taking on the San Francisco 49ers this week. I'm expecting this to be a close scoring game, primarily because of all the injuries to the 49ers, which should help Travis Etienne's baseline value. Number 21, to begin the D tier, is Alvin Kamara. Usually when you're down 30 points at halftime, you would assume that Alvin Kamara is going to get himself a couple opportunities within the receiving game. But he came away with 2 targets and 1 reception for 14 yards in this most recent contest, in which they got completely destroyed by the Seattle Seahawks. Whether it was offensively, defensively, or special teams, across the board, they were not able to hang. Therefore, you would assume Alvin Kamara gets more utilization. The fact that he only comes away with 1 reception is malpractice. I am hoping for Tyler Shough to take over sooner rather than later because Spencer Rattler is doing none of us favors. Even though Alvin Kamara is coming away with 19 total touches, 18 on the ground, 42 rushing yards is not going to cut it. And now that you are 16-point underdogs against the Buffalo Bills this week, yes, this Bills team's allowing 5.57 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs because of the injuries that they have had on their defense. But ultimately, unless we're going to get receiving utilization, I'm not expecting for much from Alvin Kamara. Number 22 is Breece Hall. Hopefully the Fields return, Justin Fields returning from his concussion, is going to elevate this offense because they certainly need some elevation in terms of being able to stay in a steady game script. This most recent week, the Jets were down 20 plus points in a quick fashion. So if we can keep these games close, taking on the Miami Dolphins, a defense that is a middle of the pack matchup, but still allowing nearly 13 fantasy points per game on the ground to opposing running backs, 4.5 yards per carry on average. If this is going to be a positive, if not neutral game script, it should open up more opportunities for Breece Hall, who in his most recent matchup against the Miami Dolphins in week 18 of the 2024 season went for 16.7 fantasy points. We're hoping for the best and hopefully for Justin Fields to return. Number 23 is Kenneth Walker. They're going to have a short week Thursday game. Obviously, Charbonnet is coming off of the injury. I do expect him to play, but in that same vein, they may go ahead and approach Charbonnet in a limited manner in comparison to Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, yes, is coming off of a performance of 2 touchdowns, 17.5 fantasy points. Wasn't very efficient, but his final touch was with 5 minutes remaining in the third quarter. So he's relatively fresh going into this upcoming game, considering this was a one-sided affair against the Saints in this most recent matchup. So hopefully, even though Charbonnet is returning, he will still continue to inhabit a lot of the overall opportunity share on the ground and near the goal line. Number 24, we have Chuba Hubbard. Look, Chuba Hubbard caught a pass, was tackled down at the 1-inch line. Unfortunately, the following play, Rico Dowdle comes in and steals the goal line plunge for a touchdown. Now, you may be thinking, well, this is a rare occasion, Angie. Well, it's not. Thus far this season, Rico Dowdle has 5 rushing attempts inside the 10-yard line in comparison to Chuba Hubbard's 2. I don't like it. On top of the fact that the Patriots matchup, the Patriots are only allowing 2.63 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, unless Chuba Hubbard's going to find himself with garbage time receiving utilization, or at least any sort of receiving workload that finds him in the end zone, which should have happened for a 3rd consecutive week here. I think number 24 is a solid base for him this week. Number 25, we have David Montgomery coming off of a ridiculous 13 touches and 164 total yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. 28.9 fantasy points. If you had David Montgomery in the lineup last night, he won you the week most likely. This is a major performance, but he's still only touching the ball 12 to 13 times per game. And even though he only needs 12 to 13 touches per game to be fantasy relevant, and he has just as many rushing touchdowns inside the 5-yard line as Jahmyr Gibbs, as he continues to get exposed to those opportunities, I think 25 is safe. When you're taking on a run-stop defense like the Browns, and you're going to be exposed to 12 to 13 potential rushing attempts, if you're able to average 4 yards per carry, as long as you accompany it with a touchdown, you're going to get 10 plus fantasy points and easily be in that top 24 conversation. But as of right now, we sit at number 25 based on whether or not he will find himself with the receiving workload, or if Gibbs will be totaling majority of the touchdown upside plays over the course of this week. Number 26, we have Javonte Williams. Look, with all the injuries that have taken place to this offense, it certainly does hurt their entire offense as a whole, and especially Javonte Williams. When CeeDee Lamb is going down, when Tyler Guyton is going to be down with an injury, again, that means less potential for scoring. And as all these injuries mount, they have an opportunity this week of not taking on the Green Bay Packers. This is going to be an interesting one, but I will say, after watching back all of the games for a second time this week, I will say that Javonte Williams is my favorite runner to watch. Every single time he makes contact with the defender, I'm telling you, he always is imposing his will and throwing defenders around. I mean, amongst all players in the league thus far, he has a 3.72 yard after contact per attempt average, which is in the top 10. Additionally, he's number 6 amongst all running backs in terms of total receptions. He is getting it done on the ground through the air, and we're just hoping that the Green Bay Packers defense that we know is elite is going to, potentially, take another week off. Fingers crossed. And they'll allow Javonte Williams to impose his will just in the same way in which Quinshon Judkins was able to in this most recent matchup. But I don't expect that to be the case. I expect this Packers defense to play at a very aggressive pace to try to take out their frustration from last week on the Dallas Cowboys offense this week. Number 27, we have Chase Brown. I don't know where else to rank him. I have to rank him this low. When he's getting no help up front, as of right now, amongst all running backs with a minimum of 5 rushing attempts, he is ranked 67th in terms of yards after contact per attempt, 2.04. I understand his offensive line is doing him no favors. The offense is doing no favors, and he actually broke a record amongst all running backs since the year 2000 who have had 45 rushing attempts in the first 3 weeks of the season. he has now had the fewest rushing yards amongst all those running backs, alongside of the 2011 CJ 2K season and, of course, the 2023 Josh Jacobs season. As a whole, Chase Brown should be able to bounce back, but it is going to require a lot of this offensive line helping him in order to accomplish that. Again, the Broncos right now allowing 4.64 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, but if this is a negative game script, he's going to have to see himself a lot of receiving utilization to be relevant this week. Number 28 is Quinshon Judkins. As the full-time starter, immediately given workhorse level of opportunity, 20 opportunities and 19 touches, and was able to come away with a huge performance of 16 fantasy points, not only finding the end zone, but making big plays down the stretch in order to help the Cleveland Browns defeat the Green Bay Packers. Now they take on the Lions, another one of these NFC North juggernauts. The Lions over the course of this season thus far have allowed 50 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown minimum to opposing running backs. Fingers crossed, of course, Quinshon Judkins can find himself with over 10 fantasy points this week. Number 29, we have TreVeyon Henderson. I truly do believe that Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson have fumbled away their jobs. As soon as both of them fumbled, from that point forward, we did not see a single touch from any other running back but TreVeyon Henderson. And I understand with his overall opportunities, he was quite inefficient, but I do believe this is very much so dependent on the offensive line. And it's not a matter of his skill, but rather the offensive line needs to improve, and they surely will. They're taking on the Panthers this week. The 11th best matchup at the position, a defense that is allowing 5.72 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. So why not TreVeyon Henderson for a huge week here, as you should be buying him low right now. If you have the opportunity to have done it last week when we talked about it via the live streams, you should have went for it. But in the event in which you have an opportunity to do so once again, buy low because the breakout is just underway. Number 30, DeAndre Swift. Look, DeAndre Swift, very different to some of these other running backs. Like Javonte Williams, who sits above him at number 26, any contact that he has made with the defender, he's running through the defender. Anytime DeAndre Swift is hit, he's immediately hitting the floor at that point after. He pretty much is Chase Brown at this point, with 2.26 yards after contact per attempt, ranking 55th amongst all running backs with 5 attempts minimum this season. Again, outside of what he has done on the ground, he has been lucky to be able to contribute within the receiving game, because if those receiving yards and receptions weren't there, he would be in a completely terrible position. Luckily, this week he takes on a Raiders defense that just allowed 143 on the ground and 2 rushing touchdowns to the running backs of the Commanders. Fingers crossed that DeAndre Swift can follow in their footsteps with a couple big runs this week. Nick Chubb is our number 31. Look, the Titans are one of the best matchups, allowing nearly 22 fantasy points per game on the ground thus far this season, but that's primarily because of the negative game scripts that they sit in, and opposing teams are able to run the clock out and, of course, run the ball in the second half of games. Nonetheless, the Titans have struggled in terms of stopping the run for now, 2 consecutive seasons here. So expect for Nick Chubb, whether it is a 50-50 split between him and Woody Marks, a 60-40, 70-30, to get himself enough ample opportunity to be successful at a top 36 capacity. Number 32 is Zach Charbonnet. I understand that he missed Week 3's contest against the New Orleans Saints, but I'm assuming that was in preparation to get him ready for this divisional matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. I'm expecting him to play. I'm expecting him to see 10 touches minimum on the ground, and potentially, if he's able to break out a big run here or get goal line opportunity, can very easily get himself into the top 30 conversation. Therefore, we have him at number 32. Number 33 is Jacory Croskey-Merritt, Bill, JCM, whatever you want to call him. He is currently in a running back by committee situation. Even though we did see Austin Eckler go down, this is a 3-headed monster between JCM, Jeremy McNichols, and Chris Rodriguez Jr. And until that begins to kind of clear itself out or begin to at least see one singular running back take away the job, when you have the running back by committee alongside of a mobile quarterback, whether it be Daniels or Mariota, it doesn't bode well for JCM this week, even though they are taking on the Atlanta Falcons, which technically is a tough matchup. Number 34 is Ollie Gordon, a running back that we mentioned that hopefully we're picking up later tonight. Within this offense, if he is going to continue to expand his role in terms of rushing opportunities, again, he looked like he was a good enough runner, not only this most recent week, but his days in college, in the preseason, to be a healthy contributor every single week. Again, this offense certainly needs someone to be able to run through the tackles on short yardage situations, even goal line opportunities. And if in fact this can be a high scoring game against the Jets, why not Ollie Gordon to be a top 36 option this week? Number 35, speaking of the Jets matchup, we have Braelon Allen. In the same vein in which I expect a guy like Breece Hall to find success, Braelon Allen, if given ample opportunity, can follow in his footsteps. They can both be relevant against this matchup against the Miami Dolphins, as the Dolphins have given up their fair share of yards per carry to opposing running backs. I mean, in this most recent week, it looked like James Conner was being shot out of a cannon every single time he took a rushing attempt. 8 yards, 9 yards, 10 yards, 20 yards. I mean, the amount of yardage he was able to gather early in that game, I think we should be able to expect much of that from the dynamic duo in this two-headed monster backfield of Breece Hall and Braelon Allen this week. The final back I wanted to mention is Woody Marks. I mentioned him as the final running back of yesterday's waiver wire episode. Again, this is an advantageous matchup, top 2 at the position. If we're expecting this to be a 50-50, 60-40, 70-30 split, Woody Marks delivered enough in the week 3 performance to, in my mind, earn more workload as we proceed. Considering we've also seen Woody Marks take over the RB2 role outright from Derrick Henry, I expect him to also try to eventually get over the top of Nick Chubb in regards to the conversation of being the RB1, because not only is he relevant on the ground, but also through the air, which makes this offense even more dynamic going forward. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my top 36 rankings. The final thing I wanted to mention, for those of you who are trying to get my top 36 rankings, or maybe my top 60 running backs, my top 80 wide receivers, my top 25 tight ends, top 32 quarterbacks, top 32 defenses, kickers, and top 120 flex for both half and full PPR rankings every single week, be sure to check out Patreon. Again, you can get all-encompassing rankings. You can ask me unlimited questions, whether it is waiver wire, starter sit, trade questions via the Patreon messenger. All this available there for those of you interested. Check it out down below in the description. But that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until later tonight, I'll be live streaming, and tomorrow, my top 40 wide receivers. I'll see you guys. Peace.